And there's more news online at bbc.co.uk/3counties.
Beds, Hearts and Bucks weather.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Tonight will be dry with long clear spells and some occasional patchy cloud, an overnight low of 9 Celsius. Then tomorrow a fine and dry day with long spells of sunshine and just a little patchy cloud. BBC Three Counties Radio, first for news.
Evening, this is BBC Three Counties Drivetime. Tuesday night, we're here to talk business and money, and my panellists this evening, 3 heavyweights from the world of business and finance. We'll start with a new boy from the Winter Group. We're joined by Mike Niles on Twitter. He's at MikeN1971. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Nice you're with us. It says on your Twitter feed, described as tall, darkish, ordinary, sword-fighting opera screamer. Now, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, they refer to my 2 main hobbies. I'm into amateur dramatics and I've been classically trained in singing since I was 8.
Not sword fighting.
And I'm also a fencer. I'm a member, or was a member of Bedford Fencing Club, and I'm a qualified fencing instructor as well. So
we should be
that little tag.
We should be wary of you then. Steve Baker is on Twitter at Quinboy. Steve's an independent financial advisor from Aylesbury, a regular contributor to the show. And you posted a tweet yesterday. We were talking about first cars. A Riley Elf.
Yes.
Was that some sort of family heirloom?
It was a fantastic little car.
Was it a puller?
I better not say. I was going out with my wife at the time.
Jonathan Davis can be found on Twitter at Jonathan Davis WM. The WM stands for Wealth Management. Jonathan is from Hertfordshire. He's also an independent financial advisor. Welcome back to the programme. 2 independent financial advisors on the panel. Let's hope there's no punch-up.
Plenty of business out there for everyone.
If there was, my wife would kill me.
And can I just say, I just noticed all 4 of us in it are all wearing specs.
Ah.
Is that because we're super intelligent, or is it because the years are starting to roll by? This is Drive. You can text the programme 81333. Start your text 3CR.
This is Drive
With Roberto Perrone.
on the BBC in Beds, Hearts and Bucks.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
So, Mike Niles, Steve Baker and Jonathan Davis. Before we start with our topic this evening, Mike, the Winter Group, what is it you do?
Well, the Winter Group is a not-for-profit organisation. We've been in Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire for 29 years this year. And what we do is we provide support, advice and training for start-up businesses in Herts and Beds. So if you're pre-start business, thinking that you might want to be going into business as self-employed, or you're in the early stages of being self-employed, then we can provide you with low-cost office space on 4-week leases. We can provide you with one-to-one business advice, free business advice in the main. We have incubator facilities where people can come in, and hot desks, so they have a place to concentrate on getting their business ready and get advice and support and networking opportunities at the same time, along with a suite of training courses which can help people with ideas of marketing, website, social media, business planning and finance.
And what's the market like for new businesses, start-up businesses? Are there people willing to take the risk?
Oh, absolutely, yes. It's a very busy market at the moment, and it's a market that's changed very much over the last 18 months to 2 years. Our traditional customers were your normal self-employed plumbers, gardeners, hairdressers, etc. And what we're seeing now more and more are people coming from high managerial backgrounds, consultancies, who are either at risk or a little bit nervous of their positions and are looking at self-employment as a means to protect themselves from the possibility of redundancy and also to become their own bosses and earn money for themselves rather than making it for everyone
And what
else.
sort of industries do they want to start? What sort of business do they want to start?
Well, there's all sorts. I mean, we have the people from management backgrounds who are taking a hobby into a business, so artists and writers and those kinds of things, but also people, and we had a couple of ladies I dealt with recently whose department was made redundant from the local council, so they formed their own company to replace the service that had gone from the local council, just to do the same job they've always done, but for themselves rather than for the council.
And I'll bring Steve and Jonathan to the conversation. I met someone the other week who was a performance poet, and I'm thinking, that's not a career, is it? That's just living in hope. Unless some sort of unless Luton Council will employ you to perform at another festival. A performance poet. I mean, it's not a career.
It's I'm always amazed. There's 1,001 ways of making money, and now it's 1,002.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the jump in number of UK bank complaints. There's been a big jump in number of complaints made to UK banks by their customers, new figures have shown. If we go through the figures, Santander complaints up by 43%, Barclays complaints up by 76%, HSBC, no bank escapes it, HSBC up by 73%, RBS 128%, and Lloyds complaints up by 146%. Where do we even start with banks and the banking system, Steve Baker?
Well, it's interesting, Phil. If I wasn't at all surprised when those stats came through, I read some statistics recently, and the amount of complaints handled by the Financial Ombudsman Service for last year, wave the IFA flag a little bit here, IFA complaints went down by 0.5% to 1%. 61% of the complaints handled by FOS are related to banks. So they're just getting it horribly wrong, aren't they?
And yet we continue to give these banks £100 billion a year in quantitative easing, money printing. It's breathtakingly stupid.
Yeah.
Is there a sense here that nothing will rein in the banks and the banking system?
Oh, there is, of course. Stop giving them money, and then they'll get their act together. Also, bring in more competition. There's another bank, Metro Bank, which got the first retail bank licence in about 100 years. It's got now 20 or so branches around London. They're hoping to get 200 in the
They're
southeast.
open on a Sunday afternoon. I've seen them open on a Sunday afternoon.
In other words, they're delivering what the customers want. They've grown from one branch to 20 branches in about 3 years. They're going to grow to 200, and do you know what? They're not up the creek financially, and they're delivering an amazing service.
Now, the problem with banks is they've tried to become all things to all men, and it's not what it's all about. And the other thing is, I think there's an embedded culture. Jonathan will remember the time when effectively banks were self-regulating, and then even you had very senior people from the banking industry who held very high positions within the governing body of the FSA, and they've just been allowed to get away with murder for too long.
Mike Niles, who's new to the panel tonight, what's your view on the banks? And this rise in number of complaints to UK banks is extraordinary. I mean, every major bank, the complaints are huge.
I mean, obviously they're under a huge amount of pressure at the moment. I mean, I was working for a bank in November 2008 when everything went a little bit pear-shaped. And wasn't working for it very much longer after that. But I mean, the thing I remember from working from within the banking system is that the whole idea of complaints is actually banks were targeted on complaints, and there was a time when one of the big national banks was actually fined because they hadn't opened up enough complaints. So obviously things have gone way beyond that, and I think the banks have got some bad press. I think actually the public and the general, I mean, I'm not from a financial services background, but simply from a personal public view is that they're under scrutiny. The banks used to be like doctors. The bank manager was someone to kind of kowtow to, and now I think the public is seeing banks as someone who should be serving them rather than them serving the banks. And I think that's where this change is seen, and they're holding the banks far more accountable as a result, I think.
But for the sort of start-up businesses that come to your organisation that want to do something else, perhaps turn a hobby into a business, are the banks giving them any help whatsoever?
Yeah, the banks are lending. The banks are lending to small businesses, but there's two criteria. I mean, firstly, and quite fairly, the banks have recently fed back to agencies such as ourselves that they're not lending money because the business plans and the cash flow forecasts that are being presented to them by small businesses don't show any viability, so they're not going to lend any money. I mean, that's fair enough. In which case, that's where we step in and hopefully help that business get a business plan and cash flow that's bank ready. But also, they do lend, but they lend on a pound-for-pound basis in the most part. So if you go to a bank wanting £5,000 to start up, they want you to share the risk and bring £5,000 to the party themselves. So that does immediately put a challenge for small businesses who don't.
Well, that's not unreasonable. I mean, finally, you know, if you want to borrow some money, you have to put up some surety. That's some concrete surety. That's not unreasonable, is it?
No, it's not unreasonable, but obviously that makes it very difficult for small businesses, particularly as a lot of the people you deal with have been unemployed for a significant period of time, who don't have that savings to help them out. And I think more than making the banks look into that, perhaps that's something that we could do as locally to help it. I mean, the Luton Borough Council and the Stevenage Borough Council offer start-up grants to small businesses at the moment. The Prince's Trust also do small start-up grants and low-interest loans for small businesses. So perhaps that might be something that would be useful in the future.
Jonathan Davis, I know your views are fairly forthcoming when it comes to the banking system. Is it still as well, how can I put it? Is it still as wonky as it was?
The banks have been out of control for about a decade. The They have a culture of fraud. They are technically insolvent, every single one of them, apart from the one that I mentioned earlier. That's the reason why, contrary to what Mike's saying, that's the reason why lending is at decade-low levels, and it will not pick up for years or indeed decades, because we haven't sorted out the banking system. We gave them...
What have they done with all this money that the Bank of England has given them?
They've recapitalised their own balance sheets.
Not even close.
They're not putting it out into the market where it's required. And I can tell you something as well. On the retail side, away from business, of late I've seen quite a lot of elderly clients, and they have been treated abysmally and been given shocking advice by representatives of banks. And some really underhand tactics.
Because, and without naming any banks, obviously.
Yeah, I know.
Because that's how it happens, because, someone who's had a bank account for 50, 60 years and had that view that the bank manager was someone to be trusted, will perhaps go into their bank and they trust their bank to look after their interests.
Mm.
The high street banks, every single one of them, are owned by the investment banks. And they have a culture of high profit, high turnover, high margin, hire and fire. They do not care. They do not care about the customers. For decades, the high street was split from the city, and then 25 years ago, with Big Bang, the investment banks were allowed to buy out the high street. That was one of the biggest mistakes that ever happened. That's what we have. So you asked, what can we do to sort out these problems? We can split the high street from the city. That will go a great way to improving standards in our retail banking and bring about prudent lending. The only reason, as I say, why there isn't much lending right now is because they're insolvent. But if you can split off the high street, then those entities will be in a more sure footing than as they currently are, because they're weighed down by the investment banks. That's why they can't lend.
But it's a good business to be in if you want to be. If you're going to start a business, be a bank, because they just keep giving you money and you're never going to be allowed to fail.
Exactly. And who's bailing them out? You, me, and the two other chaps around this table right now. We are bailing them out. The taxpayer is bailing them out year after year. We're giving them £100 billion a year, as I said. Do you know what, Roberto? That is equivalent to 200 full NHS trust hospitals every single year. It's a national disgrace.
This is Three Counties Drive.
And Bucks travel.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Hello to you on the northbound M1. Heavy because of the early broken down vehicle between, just before 13 for Bedford. That's causing queues back to 12 for Flitty in the works, but all lanes have been reopened. The southbound M1 all now clear of this earlier accident at 8 at Hemel. Traffic running a lot better as well. A1M northbound heavy around 6 at 1 in Golden City, in High Wycombe, Marlow Hill and the Abbey Way flyover seeing some delays. Also in Dunstable Town Centre heavy at the West Street lights, and in Watford slowing up around the Dome roundabout. Paul Murphy, BBC Three Counties Radio.
Paul, thank you. More from Paul just before 6:30 this evening.
See Beds, Hearts and Bucks motorway cameras on demand.
bbc.co.uk/Three Counties. Every weekday morning from 9, Jonathan Vernon Smith.
Could you have given birth without pain relief?
No way.
Why was it so painful?
Because he was £11.4.
Oh, he was a whopper.
Yes.
Jonathan Vernon Smith.
Sally's in Luton.
It was a good pain.
Sorry, how could it be a good pain? For a man like me, I have no idea what real pain is, do I?
No. They do say if a man ever had to give birth, they would only do it once.
But very probably.
Jonathan Vernon Smith. Weekday mornings from 9 on BBC Three Counties Radio. Getting Beds, Hearts and Bucks talking when you're going home.
This is Drive.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
My panel tonight, Steve Baker. He's an independent financial advisor. You can follow Steve on Twitter at Quinboy. Jonathan Davis is also on Twitter at Jonathan Davis WM. He's also independent financial advisor, and so far no fisticuffs, which is good. And new to the panel tonight, Mike Niles. You can follow Mike. He's from the Wenter Group at Mike N1971. It's 17 and a half minutes past 6 o'clock. One apparent side effect of the recession, the ongoing recession and the gloomy outlook, is an increase in consumers using in-store credit to to buy big ticket items such as dishwashers and sofas and big TVs, they're paying either monthly or weekly instalments using financing provided by the shop, rather than, for example, using the credit card. But I'm just wondering whether it's more of the same. Should you take out credit on an item if you cannot afford to buy it outright, Mike Niles?
I have done this myself quite recently. My laptop and the television I have at home both bought through finance through the shop itself. I think it's, as with anything, it's all down to cash. It's down to your cash flow. I mean, it's the same with business, same with anything. Cash is king. So if you're going to kind of spread the cost over a period of time, you've got to make sure that it is something you can afford to do. Because obviously you do end up paying an awful lot more than the value of the equipment itself, because you've got interest being added on every month. We bought a computer about 8 years ago, and we're regretting that because we're still paying it off. The computer is pretty much... The hamster is almost dead running around inside it.
Yours and mine too.
Yeah, but we're still paying off because of the interest rate. It's £10 of interest, £6 of payment. So I think if you're going to do that, it comes down to researching the market and actually doing the numbers and seeing whether you can afford to pay it back.
Shouldn't our attitudes have changed? I mean, Jonathan, the idea of credit loans, whether you get it on store credit, whether you put it on a plastic credit card, or whether you have a loan, it's still borrowing money.
It shows that people are still not learning reality. We are in the biggest depression in history. The United Kingdom is the most indebted nation on the planet. In 2009, they didn't sort out the issues. They didn't sort out the problem. And what they did was they compounded it by borrowing even more. And people who are in work or running their own businesses, they must know that there is a constant risk that they're not going to be in work in due course. And yet, as you are saying, there's an increase in store credit. People are not learning that they are taking on risks that they need to be more careful about. Why can't they go onto eBay and buy a TV for 30 quid? The answer is because they just haven't got to grips with reality, and people need to get to grips with reality because they're going to go bankrupt otherwise.
But we've had generations, 2, 3, maybe 4 generations there of us, really, that if we wanted something, we'd just go and get it. It wasn't a question of saving up for something, Steve Baker. If we wanted something, we'd go and get it. I'm surprised that people's attitudes haven't changed.
It's consumerism gone mad, isn't it? It's peer group pressure. People see things and think they almost have a right to it, and they're going to get it at all costs. The watchword here needs to be take care, because I did a quick scan of differing rates on store cards and so forth,